The 2026 World Cup is supposed to be the greatest sporting event in American history. 64 matches, 16 cities, 3 nations, billions of dollars, and the entire world watching. But something has gone dangerously wrong. Not on the field, not in the stadiums, behind the closed doors of government offices, financial boardrooms, and diplomatic embassies around the globe, a revolt is brewing. And it's aimed directly at FIFA, at the United States, and at the tournament that was supposed to unite the world. Countries are pulling back, governments are threatening boycotts, sponsors are getting nervous, and inside FIFA headquarters, the phones are ringing off the hook with calls nobody wants to answer. This is not a rumor. This is not an overreaction. This is the 2026 World Cup slowly, visibly, catastrophically unraveling, and most Americans have no idea how bad it's already gotten. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand why the world is revolting, you need to understand how we got here. When FIFA awarded the 2026 World Cup to the United States, Canada, and Mexico back in 2018, it looked like a slam dunk. North America had the infrastructure, the money, the stadiums, and the global brand power. FIFA was expanding the tournament to 48 teams for the first time in history. More countries, more matches, more money. Everybody wins. That was the plan. But almost immediately, the cracks started showing, not in the concrete of the stadiums, in the politics, in the money, in the relationships between FIFA and the nations that were supposed to show up and play ball. Because here's what FIFA didn't fully account for. The world had changed since 2018. The geopolitical landscape had shifted in ways that made hosting a global tournament on American soil far more complicated than anyone admitted publicly. And that's when the real problems started. The first major shockwave came from the visa crisis. Multiple nations, African teams, Middle Eastern delegations, Asian football federations began sounding alarm bells about the United States visa process. Players, coaches, team officials, even family members of athletes were being denied visas or stuck in bureaucratic nightmares with no clear resolution. Think about that for a second. You've qualified for the World Cup. Your nation has been waiting years for this moment. Your players have trained their entire lives. And then a government form stands between them and the greatest stage in football. FIFA began receiving formal complaints, then more complaints, then the complaints turned into threats. Several African football associations sent strongly worded letters demanding FIFA guarantee visa access for all participating nations or face consequences. The word boycott started appearing in official communications for the first time. FIFA panicked, quietly, privately, but the panic was real. But that was only the beginning, because at the exact same time the visa crisis was exploding, another storm was forming on the other side of the world, and this one involved money, serious money. The commercial rights disputes surrounding the 2026 World Cup had been building for years. Broadcasting contracts, sponsorship territories, revenue-sharing agreements between FIFA and the host nations, all of it had become a tangled, combustible mess. Several major markets, including territories in South America and Southeast Asia, were locked in bitter disputes with FIFA over broadcast rights. In Brazil, the country that lives and breathes football, there was genuine outrage over what many called FIFA's financial arrogance. Brazilian media companies felt squeezed out of fair broadcasting deals. Brazilian fans were being asked to pay more to watch a tournament happening on a continent thousands of miles away. The frustration wasn't just commercial, it was cultural. It felt like an insult. Social media exploded overnight. Hashtags calling for resistance to FIFA trended across Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia. Millions of fans couldn't believe it. These are the nations that gave the world the most beautiful football ever played, and they felt like they were being treated as afterthoughts by a Swiss organization drunk on American dollars. Even longtime FIFA supporters were furious. Behind the scenes, South American football officials were holding emergency meetings. CONMEBOL, the South American Confederation, began making noise about demanding renegotiated terms. When a confederation that represents nations like Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Colombia starts talking about leverage, FIFA listens, or it should. But FIFA didn't move fast enough. They never do.
The political dimension of this revolt erupted in a way that genuinely shocked even the most seasoned football observers. Several nations, particularly in the Middle East and parts of Africa, began using the World Cup as a flashpoint for much deeper grievances against American foreign policy. This isn't just about football anymore. That's what people need to understand. When you host a tournament on your soil, every conflict your country is involved in, every sanctions regime, every diplomatic dispute, it all comes to the party. The World Cup doesn't exist in a political vacuum. It never did. Nations that have strained or hostile relationships with the United States government started asking very loud questions. Would their fans be safe? Would their delegations be treated with dignity? Would political pressure be applied behind the scenes to influence match outcomes or refereeing decisions? These questions might sound extreme, but they were being asked, officially, in writing. And FIFA found itself caught in the middle, trapped between an American host and an increasingly restless global membership. The financial consequences of this growing revolt are staggering. We're talking about a tournament that FIFA projected would generate over $6 billion in revenue. Sponsorship deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars were signed based on the assumption of a unified, celebrated, globally supported event. Now those assumptions are wobbling. When countries signal dissatisfaction, when fan bases in massive markets feel alienated, when governments start making political statements about American foreign policy through the lens of a football tournament, sponsors get nervous. Corporate boardrooms don't like controversy, they don't like unpredictability, and they especially don't like the word boycott appearing anywhere near their brand. Several major global sponsors quietly began requesting contingency briefings from FIFA. What is the plan if this escalates? What happens to brand visibility if key markets disengage? What is the reputational exposure? FIFA had no clean answers. Just hours later, or so it seemed because the news was moving at a dizzying pace, reports emerged that multiple high-ranking FIFA member associations had requested an emergency session of the FIFA Council. The agenda was simple and devastating: a formal review of whether the 2026 World Cup could proceed under the current conditions without damaging the long-term credibility of the entire organization. That request itself was the earthquake. In FIFA's modern history, nothing like this had happened at this scale, this close to a tournament. This wasn't internal grumbling. This wasn't a single nation venting frustration. This was a coalition of member associations from multiple continents, formally putting on record their belief that something had gone catastrophically wrong. The American football establishment couldn't believe what it was hearing. The U.S. Soccer Federation had spent years preparing for this moment. American cities had invested enormous sums in stadium upgrades, infrastructure improvements, transportation logistics. New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, Miami, Chicago. These cities had skin in the game, hundreds of millions of dollars of skin, and now they were watching a global revolt unfold in real time. What happened next stunned everyone. The Mexican government entered the conversation, and not diplomatically. Senior Mexican officials began making pointed public statements connecting the World Cup hosting situation to the broader tensions between Mexico and the United States over trade, immigration, and border policy. The message was barely subtle. We are co-hosts, but we are not subordinates. Mexico has enormous cultural pride in this tournament. Football isn't just a sport in Mexico, it's a national identity. The idea that Mexican co-hosting could be overshadowed, disrespected, or treated as secondary to the American spectacle ignited a firestorm of resentment that spilled from sports media into mainstream political discourse. Mexican fans, passionate, numerous, loud, began organizing. Protests outside FIFA offices, coordinated social media campaigns, calls to prominent Mexican politicians demanding they take a harder line in negotiations. Millions of fans couldn't believe it had come to this. And all the while, Canada watched with a mixture of frustration and discomfort. Canadian football officials had worked enormously hard to be credible co-hosts. Cities like Toronto and Vancouver had built serious preparations, but Canada was now caught in a geopolitical storm it hadn't signed up for, sitting between an American controversy and a Mexican grievance and a global revolt, trying to figure out how to protect its own investment and reputation. Behind the scenes, urgent diplomatic back-channeling was happening at levels that went far above the FIFA offices in Zurich. Government representatives, not just football officials, were involved. The conversation had grown too big for sports administrators to contain. Then came the twist that nobody, absolutely nobody, saw coming. Internal FIFA documents, the existence of which was first reported in European football media, allegedly revealed that senior FIFA officials had been aware of the visa problem, the broadcast disputes, and the political sensitivities for longer than they publicly admitted. The suggestion was damning. FIFA had known about the brewing crisis and had chosen to manage the optics rather than solve the underlying problems, betting that the financial momentum of the tournament would overwhelm any resistance.
If that reporting is accurate, and FIFA has not credibly denied the substance of it, then this isn't just a management failure. It's a betrayal of every nation that trusted the process. It's a betrayal of every fan who believed the 2026 World Cup would be something pure. Social media didn't just explode, it detonated. Even some of the most loyal, most forgiving voices in global football journalism, people who had defended FIFA for decades of corruption scandals and controversy, started using language they'd never used before. Words like arrogance, words like contempt, words like this organization needs to be fundamentally rebuilt. The pressure on FIFA president Gianni Infantino became intense and personal. Calls for accountability, calls for transparency, calls for genuine structural reform, not the cosmetic reform FIFA always promises and never delivers. And here's where it gets truly serious. Because the revolt happening right now isn't just about 2026. The nations pushing back, the confederations demanding answers, the fans organizing and refusing to be silent, they understand something that FIFA's leadership seems determined to ignore. The 2030 World Cup, the 2034 World Cup, the entire future of the tournament, all of it depends on the world believing that FIFA is trustworthy, fair, and genuinely accountable to the global community, rather than to the highest-paying host and the most powerful political interests. If 2026 collapses into chaos, even partial chaos, the damage doesn't end when the final whistle blows. The damage echoes forward. It reshapes relationships between football's governing body and its members for a generation. The countries revolting today are not just angry about visa forms and broadcast deals. They are drawing a line. They are saying, we will not be treated as extras in someone else's production. We are football. We built this sport. We carry this sport in our blood and our streets and our children's dreams, and we will not be humiliated. That message is landing in FIFA offices with the force of an earthquake. So, what happens now? FIFA is scrambling. Emergency meetings are being scheduled. Phone calls are being made to government officials across multiple continents. Promises are being offered. Some genuine, some almost certainly not. The United States government has a decision to make about how seriously it wants to engage with the legitimate concerns of visiting nations, not just as a courtesy, as a strategic necessity, because the world is watching how America treats this moment, and the world has a long memory. The sponsors are watching, the broadcasters are watching, the billions of ordinary football fans on every continent who just want to see their teams play on the greatest stage, they are watching too. And right now, what they're seeing is a tournament in crisis, a governing body exposed, a host nation under pressure, and a global community that has decided it's done swallowing its frustration in silence. The 2026 World Cup was supposed to be historic. It still can be, but not if FIFA keeps pretending this revolt is manageable noise rather than a fundamental warning. The world isn't just asking questions anymore. The world is making demands. And if those demands aren't met, if the arrogance continues, if the problems are papered over and issues are buried under press releases and polished statements, then what happens to the 2026 World Cup will be remembered not as the greatest sporting event on American soil. It will be remembered as the moment the world finally said enough. The clock is ticking. FIFA is running out of time to get this right, and the countries revolting today are not going away. This is the 2026 World Cup, and it may never be the same again.